Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Lauren, everyone at the JCC for having us. There are so many people who worked on the film in the audience today, so we wanted to take a minute to read some names and have you stand up when we say your name so we can give you a round of applause, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Our producer, Marcela Garcia Steingart, who's over here. Our co-producer, Emily Schumann. From Imagine Documentaries, our executive producer, Meredith Coffers. Our development executive, Lily Kaplan. Our line producer, Ryan Carley. One of our directors of photography is in town but might be on a shoot. Emily Topper, are you here? No. Okay. Our lead assistant editor, Elizabeth Lay. Our archival producer, who we met in person for the first time tonight after spending so long together on Zoom, Helen Ryan Dabrowski.
We also have an archival researcher who helped us at Yale, Kendall Donaldson. Did you make it? Maybe not. Our lead production assistant, Sam Baez. Our production assistant, Kendall Marianacci. Our gaffer, Eric Hora. Our production designer, Annie Simeon Morales. Our graphic designer, Angelique George. We have from Selden Middle School, the teacher of all the students who you met, Michelle Miller. We do have four young voices in the audience. We have some of our letter readers, Ellie and Adi Abir. And we also have Phoebe and Micah Pardo Blume. And we have another really special guest in the audience. One of Judy's childhood friends, Joanne Stern, is here. Thank you, Joanne. I hope we didn't leave anyone off the list who came tonight, but we had such a special crew. Well, of course, Gabby Moss, who you met on screen, who we're so honored to be here with tonight. And our families, we also have our family, well, two of Davina's kids I mentioned are letter readers, but we also have our families in the audience, our husbands and siblings and in-laws. So thank you so much for being here.
And I want to turn it back to these ladies. Let's another round of applause. Oh, you hate it. Well, it's so great to be here tonight. I think this is a tale that can only be told by asking, where did each of your relationships with the work of Judy Blume start? What was your first Judy Blume?
So funny, I was always amazed at the recall people had, people we interviewed like you. I don't remember what the first book was. I remember what the most formative one was, and it was Margaret. Like, for so many people, I was an early bloomer. I got my period when I was 10, before my big sister got hers, which was mortifying. And I think to open up a book like Margaret, that's about a kid who wanted the thing that I was so ashamed of, just kind of blew my mind and brought incredible comfort. And then also to see characters in the book who were experiencing like all levels of that experience. It was it. I mean, that was a book that I went back to again and again until it was sort of like the cover was falling off, the pages were falling out.
Yeah.
I have an entirely different relationship to Judy Blume's books because, unlike Davina, I didn't really read Judy Blume as a kid. And you're probably wondering, how the hell are you standing up here tonight having made a film about a woman that so many people grew up with and fell in love with from such an early age? But I grew up in the South, in Jacksonville, Florida, where Judy's books are still banned, and they were seen as taboo. And I was a good girl who did not want to do what she was not supposed to do. And I was a very late bloomer. Davina and I always joke about how we are on the opposite ends of the spectrum of growing up. I didn't get my period until I was 16. I was a junior in high school. Yeah, it was not funny. And I was a little bit wary of growing up, and I think I internalized a lot of the shame surrounding puberty and sexuality and women's bodies that a lot of the, society in the South was telling me I should feel. And so I really didn't discover Judy Blume until Davina introduced. I mean, I read Freckle Juice when I was a kid, fine. But I didn't really discover the Judy Blume everyone else knows until Davina asked me if I wanted to direct the film with her. She said, why don't you just check out a couple videos of Judy online? So I met Judy through the way that you've met her, through the way that she talks to you directly through the camera and into the camera and directly sort of into your childhoods and into your soul. That's how I met her. So that's sort of, I have a very different relationship to her books.
I think it was a real asset for the film to have both sides of that coin, right? Because if you have too much emotional attachment, it can cloud you. And I think Leah brought in this objectivity and perspective that really really balanced the film.
You were able to check each other.
Yeah.
I mean, I did fall in love with her right away, so it wasn't entirely objective.
And I would also just like to say it's wonderful that we've immediately, in Judy's honor, created an environment where you can say the exact age you got your period here. If any of you feel like shouting it out, just feel free. And so from I guess the movie was your idea, is what I'm taking from that. How did the idea start?
So it started with my kids who are here on a road trip about 5 years ago. Very long road trip. We used to go to Nova Scotia every summer, and for some crazy reason, my husband and I decided no iPads in the car. So one summer I decided to turn on Tales of Fourth Grade Nothing, the audiobook. They hadn't read any Judy Blume books yet. And I didn't realize that Judy narrates that one herself. So I hit play and her voice filled the car. And she's got just the most musical, effervescent voice. And I think for the very first time, I started thinking really about who Judy Blume was. I had always been really attached to her characters and the stories. But unlike a lot of the kids who actually wrote to her, I had never really thought about her, Judy Blume, the woman. And so suddenly, seeing my kids fall in love with the words, hearing her voice, hearing that story again for the first time in so many years, I immediately wanted to know all about Judy Blume today. Where was she today? What had happened to her? What was she doing? So I started Googling just out of curiosity, and then filmmaker curiosity takes over.
And was there anything that made you think that this current moment in history was kind of the perfect time to tell the story of Judy Blume?
Not necessarily. It definitely felt like the stories were still relevant. History wasn't repeating itself in the exact way it feels like it is now. That sort of started in the middle of the production. We knew that we would talk to banned authors. We knew books were still being banned, but it hadn't reached the frenzy that it's at right now. And yeah, it gives me the chills watching every time, but realizing how relevant and how similar it is. What's happening today, how similar it is to what was happening then. So yes and no. Yes, I knew that the books were still relevant and there was a time listening to them and that they're universal and that women's bodies are still being contested and all these things, but it really evolved over the course of the making of the film. Roe versus Wade being overturned while we're in the middle of the edit. Those are things that we, I guess, could have predicted, but weren't necessarily top of mind when I started thinking about the film.
It just unfortunately ended up being incredibly timely. So how did it go from a concept to how did you get Judy on board? Was it tough?
It was tough. I reached out to her. I wrote her a letter, Dear Judy letter, like so many before me. And it was about 1.5 years of back and forth emails. She was tempted, but not convinced initially. she's got a really full life. She runs a bookstore. She loves biking around Key West with George. Really, the bookstore is it's her job right now. And I think she knows enough about filmmaking to know that this was going to be a big commitment. And if she was going to do it, she wanted to do it properly and fully and really give all of herself to it. So, it was a long back and forth of getting to know each other. And then we finally had the chance to meet. And it was still a maybe. And then I took the film to Imagine, Sarah Bernstein at Imagine, who Leah and I had worked with before. And I think that was the final push. And then in February 2020, Judy said yes, and you know what happens after that. And that's when I said to Leah was back in Brooklyn after having lived in Paris for a few years, and I said, please will you direct this with me as soon as you can.
So yeah, the standard Q&A question was the biggest challenge that came up while you were making this, but I think we all have a very good idea of what the biggest challenge was that you were making this, you guys. So production started right around when the COVID pandemic started. How do you create a documentary during a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic?
Well, let's see. Our first conference call with Imagine was March 12th, 2020. And we were planning to go for our first shoot to Key West. So we first shot in Key West a year later. No, we first shot more than a year later in Key West in the summer of 2021. We spent, in some ways, the pandemic was actually, obviously it was the worst thing that's happened. But for the film, it allowed us to have this long development period, which we wouldn't have had we been able to go shoot right away. So we spent that summer, that spring and summer of 2020, while our kids were longing on to Zoom school, and while we were all stuck inside, we spent reading and rereading Judy's books and really watching tons of films that were coming-of-age films from the 80s and 90s, trying to get a sense of what we wanted this film to be, how we wanted to tell Judy's life story, how we wanted to find moments in her life that intersected with moments in her books. And I think it really gave us the time to think, which is something that we're really good at doing together on the phone, breathing. All we could hear was each other breathing, and we're thinking and writing lots of notes. So we put together this beautiful pitch deck with the help of Lily Kaplan from Imagine, and we pitched it to Amazon, and they said yes. And once they said yes, and we got the budget going, and we brought in people like Ryan, our line producer, we were able to go down to Key West and start shooting. But obviously with masks, with very strict COVID protocols, because Judy's very COVID cautious, as she should be, and you see that in the bookstore, we couldn't shoot without masks with any of the many people who came in. That was just a typical day. We did not stage that. Typically, there are just tons of fans that show up at the bookstore.
At what point in the process did you realize that her fans and the letters were going to be such a huge part of the film?
See, somewhere between meeting Judy and Judy agreeing to do the film, I decided to go to Yale, where her archives are, to have a look at the letters. Because I'd heard about the letters, but didn't quite realize how extraordinary they were and how many thousands upon thousands there were at Yale, and how powerful it would be to be there and pick up the letters and see kids' handwriting, see Lori Kim's handwriting. And the letters are under very strict protections, so it's not like you can go in and
just check them out. Yeah.
Yeah, Judy's really protected the privacy of kids who wrote to her, but they're there at the library. So I think as soon as we saw those letters, we knew that they were going to be an important part of the story, because that correspondence it's really unusual. Lots of people get fan mail, but the way that she wrote back and engaged and formed relationships was incredibly powerful, and we felt like it was this great. It's such a testimony to the connection that kids felt with her. Yeah, that she was the one that they turned to.
That she would show up at some of their college graduations.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is, the dream. But
right?
how did you guys? There's kind of an unusual, awesome design to the movie with the clips from other films, the animations. I had forgotten about the twirling maxi pads. Very amazing. How and why did you decide that sort of the way to tell Judy's story was in less of a linear front to back historical fashion and more with kind of digressions and vibe?
I mean, I think figuring out how to structure the film is always one of the biggest challenges in a documentary, especially when you have a biography, which has a classic narrative structure, right? Childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and that's a very clear. And then time progresses from when she was born in the 30s through the 40s, post-war 50s, 60s. I mean, we actually, I think it's a pretty traditional structure. We ended up falling back on a pretty traditional structure, but interweaving the book excerpts and the sort of really contemporary animation helped you feel like we're not just living in those decades that we, move through, but we sort of get a little extra. But I think it is sort of a linear story. I mean, it's really like a story of her life, and then the story of like the progression in society through, all those decades in America. Really focusing on the progression of women's rights through those eras. We didn't tell the entire story of the U.S.
We had to leave out a lot of books.
Yeah.
In order for it not to feel encyclopedic, we had to leave out a lot. So we would have loved to do more about Sally, starring Sally J. Friedman as herself, which is such an important book for Judy. Iggy's House, just as long as we're together, which I think you read from, a really funny scene when we interviewed you, which I love. I mean, and everyone has their personal favorite, and we couldn't do everyone's personal favorite, but the books had to be used in such a way that they were really speaking to Judy's life story.
Yeah, by leaving stuff out, it ended up, I think, creating a much more intimate kind of vibe for the whole thing, which certainly suited Judy's incredibly intimate vibe for the whole thing. Was it easy to get her to a place where she was comfortable, going so deeply into her own life and emotions? Like, I was just from the get-go in this movie, she's so open.
Yes.
Yes. You just turned the camera on. We didn't have to do much.
I mean, we definitely had, these years of building a relationship, and then the year of our Zoom relationship during the pandemic, where we were sort of getting to know each other that way. But I think that is Judy's nature. It comes through her work, right? To be open and forthcoming with people.
Yeah, watching this when she's, talking about the guy she dated in 9th grade and talking on I was like, wow, she's really like that in real life.
And she remembers everything.
Oh. Yeah. All right. What is the most surprising thing that came up over the process of filming this?
Well, I guess I think for me was the depth of her relationships with the letter writers. We asked Judy, once we discovered the letters at Yale, we asked Judy, can we reach out to any of these women? Because their privacy is very strictly protected by Yale, by Judy and George. And she said, I would love to introduce you to a few people who I know, might be open to sharing their stories with the film. So we met Lori and Karen, and I don't think I was prepared for how profound the experience was going to be of meeting Lori and meeting Karen especially. This is actually our first screening where Karen hasn't been in the audience, and she was at Sundance with us, and it was so moving to be there with her and experience the audience sort of relating to her after the screenings and during the screening. And I think her bravery and her courage in sharing her story, both to Judy and then to us and then to all of you through the film, was just really, it was extraordinary. And that relationship with Karen has been one of the most unexpected and extraordinary things to come out of the making of this film for me.
Same for you.
Yes, all of that. I mean, I think also realizing what a trailblazer Judy was in her personal life, in her professional life. I knew that she was a trailblazer in terms of talking about things in books that hadn't been talked about, and the way she wrote the interior lives of girls in a way that was really new. I didn't realize how much she was always pushing back against expectations throughout her life.
Yeah.
Always. And then it sort of reaches a peak in the censorship years when you see her fighting Pat Buchanan, just going head to head with him. It just blows the mind. So that was a real surprise.
Really kicking his ass in there, I thought. Yeah.
Gabrielle, I'd love to bring the audience into the conversation. So if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand, and either Caroline or I will come over and bring you a microphone. So I'll ask a question, which is, what has surprised you about the response of the film, and what do you hope is the largest takeaway from the documentary?
One of the things that surprised us at Sundance was how emotional some of the screenings were. That we had people come up to us and in tears saying they were, I mean, all kinds of things. But for example, how angry they felt about information that was withheld for them when they were growing up, that they weren't allowed to know anything about their own sexuality. That but seeing the film, even if they weren't Judy Blume fans, had brought up a lot about that. We also had, people coming up to us after screening saying, I was dragged here, and I loved it. Guys who had never read a Judy Blume book and completely falling in love with her for the first time, and that was really amazing to see.
I took my husband to a previous screening of this who had, I think, never read anything or read Super Fudge, and we were leaving, and he was like, I didn't know Judy Blume was so punk rock.
Here, I'll bring the microphone because we're recording.
First of all, I want to tell you it was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. I think we all did. Question: the placement of the telephones in the interviews. I think it was only 2 or maybe 3 of the interviews where there wasn't a telephone that I noticed, and I was curious about that.
Well, the cat's actually a phone.
Oh, okay.
So you might not have counted the cat, but that's a
Might
phone.
not have noticed that one. Okay.
Well, we have our production designer, Annie, in the audience who helped us come up with the idea for the interview setups with the vintage wallpaper and, spare but very nostalgic props that felt sort of like an abstracted, bedroom, living room from the era in which Judy's books were first written. We were really inspired by Judy's paperback covers, the original covers, and so that was the world we were trying to create. And the phones, I mean, we just loved those vintage phones. We had what we can try to pontificate about what phones symbolize, the communication that the telepathy between Judy and her readers. That's what we were trying to symbolize with those phones.
Any other questions?
First of all, thank you so much. I'm a 3rd-generation Judy Blume lover because I have a 9-year-old grandson. So I'm just very thrilled to be here. I wonder, and she just blows me away, I wonder if today she were writing, like she was so ahead of her time. I didn't see it in the film so much. Would she have had such success or such a great influence given the times we're living in now? I just wondered about that. And you may not have that answer, but,
Maybe I'll throw this one to you.
I think the thing about Judy is that she's very comfortable pushing boundaries in whatever way feels honest to her. So I think if she were writing now, she'd be pushing different boundaries in just in the same honest way.
So a hot topic in the news right now is taking old classic books and updating them with pronouns and making them more diverse and things like that. He, she's versus them, theys and things like that. Would that be appropriate for these books? You understand was I clear in my question? There is a book series right now which is totally being rewritten, and I'm trying to remember what it is. The Roald Dahl books.
Yeah.
And they're so, there's going to be no more he's, no more theys, more diversity in the
Well,
books.
that's not accurate. It's not no more he's. That's
Thank
not
you.
That's not how it is. But.
You can explain it probably better than I can, but what would you think about these books and updating them?
We're going to say yes. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, can I turn it back to Jason Reynolds in the film who says, I don't think Judy Blume wrote her books to be timeless. I think she wrote her books to be timely. And they became timeless because they were so timely. Only Judy can answer that question, but I think you can probably guess what we're going to say about whether or not Judy's book should be updated in that way.
I think the only update that's been made to any of her books has to do with sanitary napkins.
The sanitary napkins in Margaret have been updated, yes.
They're no longer a belt, they're now adhesive.
Yes.
In case you were wondering.
It's also interesting that that the cover art has shifted, and I don't know, Gabrielle, if you can speak to perhaps how cover art might influence readers today to pick up these timely books.
Yeah, Judy's books have been, the cover art has been updated. You can see a little bit in the film, 70s, 80s, 90s, and onward, kind of tied to whatever the cover art trends are of that decade, which is, I think, a small but important part of how her work has stayed so relevant that a kid can pick them up and, think they're picking up something contemporary. It's not packaged like an Anne of Green Gables book where you're like, oh, it's for my grandmama. It seems very, very relevant and modern.
And they're more graphic today rather than illustrative. So instead of a picture of a blonde girl, it's what is the mark? Oh, it's the text, right? Margaret
was
is
the
text.
text
So instead of
messages,
showing
yeah.
images of very very specific type of person, they're allowing all types of kids to be able to potentially see themselves in the books.
One other shift in Judy's covers is that now the title is very small, but Judy's name is very big. So that is how they're selling Judy's books, through her name.
So we have time for one more question. Well, then I'll throw it to you guys with the seed that I planted at the beginning of the night. What can make something both timeless and nostalgic at the same time?
Telephones.
Done. Thank you. Sorry, it's late. It's a Tuesday.
I think it was great. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And thank you, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you again soon.